The trio make it to Sacramento, but soon realize they don't know where the governor lives, or what he looks like. Now, when I was 16, I wasn't too much into politics, and I wouldn't have recognized then Idaho Governor Dirk Kempthorne if I passed him on the street. But you know what I wasn't doing? Flying across the state to meet him and give him life or death information about a war with aliens. I think if I was going to do that, I might take the time to check out a map and look at his photograph. What's even worse is that for the last 6 books or so, Marco and Axe have been the Animorphs' go-to research team. It seems like the Animorphs don't do anything anymore without Marco and Axe finding out as much information on this thing as they can on the internet. Which is smart. But I guess we can just wing it this time? Okay. Eventually, they find directions to the governor's mansion. We use our flymorphs, I said. Buzz past the guard and into the house. Nobody'll notice us. Perfect, said Tobias. If we were looking for garbage cans and bathrooms. It's just a guess, but I doubt he'll be spending large amount of times in either of those places. Well, I don't know. This is Gray Davis we're talking about. Wah, 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 wah. As the 3 Animorphs debate on how they should sneak into the place, a limo pulls up. So they morph Cockroach and try to hitch a ride on the undercarriage, which, as you can imagine, is as silly as everything else. The limo takes its occupants, a man and a woman, to some kind of high society gathering and dance, and the Animorphs stick to the couple like glue, assuming the man to be the governor. After some dancing, the couple and a couple of bodyguards go into a room to get away from the crowd, and Marco takes this as a time to reveal himself. So he demorphs in front of them, talking all the way through to minimize startling them. I mean, it's a cockroach turning into a little Hispanic boy. You have to be really careful not to turn this into a metaphor when approaching the governor of a border state. However, it turned out the Animorphs had it wrong the whole time. Governor! My sideways cockroach mouth melted into lips, teeth, and tongue. Governor! I was human now. I stepped toward Wingtip, my hands in the air. Tell him not to shoot, please. No, don't shoot. Just watch him, closely. It was an order. But it didn't come from Wingtip. It came from High Heel. I turned. I am the governor, she said. Her face was white, her body tense, but her eyes remained steady. And who are you? The governor? I stared at her. It didn't even occur to me that the governor could be a woman. Whoa, Gray Davis, you're really rocking those pumps. Okay, obviously they've gone with a fictional governor of California for this series, which is fine. If they played the real politician card, it would have revealed where the Animorphs live a whole 2 books before it's actually revealed. And the governor character is actually pretty neat. She's a middle-aged woman who's allowed to be strong, authoritative, and smart. She doesn't try to delude herself when presented with concrete evidence of some kind of alien presence. She gets on board pretty quickly. The governor is a pretty cool character, all told. There's just 2 problems with this reveal, however. The first is that at least part of the reason for this character's gender is for a crappy, you mean this person of power is a woman joke, which was trite and lame in the 60s, let alone 2001. The other problem is that she doesn't have a name. She's just referred to as the governor throughout this book and the rest of the series. That's like step 1 of passing the Bechdel test, naming your female characters. And it's not that none of the other characters introduced in this plot don't get names. We get a ton of names of National Guard officers, politicians, security officers, and even the first name of the governor's husband. But we can't be bothered to name the woman whom the Animorphs revealed the Yeerk invasion to? Why do this? I could probably whip up some BS Tumblr theory on sexism and publishing, but I think the reason we don't get a name here is the same reason the governor isn't Gray Davis. Animorphs is still trying to keep up the we can't tell you where we live angle, despite it no longer being applicable to the text now that the Yeerks know the Animorphs' identity. It's not even on the back of the book anymore. In ways that might be giving this book too much credit, it's as if this book is about pretending the narrative collapse of the last book didn't happen, that it's trying to be Animorphs at a point where Animorphs as we know it no longer exists. And in my opinion, it's a lesser story for it. The comedy feels distracting and out of place, and attempts at old traditions result in new characters not quite cementing. Without a name, the governor at times feels more like a caricature of a woman in power than as a real character. Of course, there are Yeerks at this event, including the governor's husband. How did the Yeerks manage to infest her husband but not the governor herself? You guys, you kind of missed. This leads to some chaos and violence that spills out into the dance floor, and by violence I mean Three Stooges shtick. A controller leaped from behind a bass drum. I grabbed a tuba, shoved it over his head. Animorphs, the great sci-fi epic! So Marco is a gorilla, Tobias is a Hork-Bajir, Axe is an Andalite. The three of them escape with the governor into a limo. Tobias drives while Axe puts on his professional airs now that he's addressing a person of power, which is silly, but it's a detail I like since it hints towards Andalite formality, a bit of world building. The chase scene that follows is kinda confusing, honestly. It's hard to get a sense of space, where our heroes are in relation to everything else. Eventually, the limo gets trapped on a bridge, surrounded by cops, both normal cops and cop controllers, with a helicopter flying overhead, raining Drakon fire down on them. We dove for the pavement again, crouched low between a Frito delivery truck and a TV repair van. Tshoo! The delivery truck exploded. Fritos rained down on us as we rolled under the van. Oh no! Fritos without dip? You can't have Fritos without dip! Yeerks, you bastards! Eventually the Animorphs escape by leaping off the bridge, with Marco holding onto the governor and onto a passing yacht, which the Yeerks blow up just as quickly. Marco morphs Dolphin for the governor to ride, because this book might as well be a Lisa Frank sticker, and the Animorphs manage to sneak back to the governor's mansion, because of course the Yeerks wouldn't think to keep an eye on that place. The governor changes out of her wet clothes, and her and the three Animorphs finally start hammering out the details. The governor starts calling National Guard officers to order them to stop their operations, with the understanding that those that refuse are probably controllers. One name stands out, a Colonel Larson, whose battalion has been doing exercises in the desert for the last 2 weeks. A whole battalion, and not a Yeerk among them. That's good news. Now, what to do with them? This is great. I pushed the phone toward her. Call him. Tell him to keep his troops together. Have them bunker down someplace where the Yeerks can't get to them. I think I know just the place. She took the phone from me and punched in a number. Colonel Larson, she said, this is the governor, and I've got a little emergency. The call took about a minute and a half. The governor told the lieutenant colonel what she needed, and Lieutenant Colonel's voice boomed back through the receiver. Yes, ma'am. She hung up. We're converting the grounds of the governor's mansion into temporary headquarters. Colonel Larson's battalion can be set up a camp on the lawn. She shook her head. My gardener's going to have a stroke. What? What? What are we doing? Why are we parking our best allies out in the open? Are we having a love-in? Is there going to be a band? One bombing run on the governor's mansion and all of this will have been for nothing. There's also stuff about setting up some personal bodyguards for the governor, but I'll let you in on a little secret. None of these guys are going to show up again. I could talk about this one loyal guard named Collins. I could talk about RoboCop. It's not going to matter that much. What does matter is that a bunch of Yeerk-controlled troops are now making their way to the mansion. See? It's totally the first place the Yeerks would look. Do you still want to station Larson's troops here? Well, the Animorphs aren't going to give up the governor, so they plan a fake-out. Marco secretly acquiring the governor and stealing her wet clothes. Marco goes into Cougar Morph and leaves the mansion, pretending to be the real governor. He confronts the National Guard troops, led by a guy whom Marco immediately pegs as Visor 1 and Morph. Marco, as the governor, is quickly manhandled into a truck and driven away, either to be infested or killed. Tobias and Axe, both in Hork-Bajir Morph, get the drop on the truck and knock out the controllers driving it. The ruse is successful, and I guess with nothing left to offer the governor, the trio morph ducks again and start flying home. Back at the Animorphs camp, we learn what the rest of the team, along with the auxiliary Animorphs and some of the free Hork-Bajir, were up to during this time, stopping that mass infestation event. They might not have survived the struggle if Larson's troops hadn't shown up, marking the first major human military offensive action against the Yeerks. I'm not entirely clear how Larson beat the trio to the city. I thought they were all going to the governor's lawn for lemonade and croquet, but whatever. Everyone watches the news that night, and the governor comes on to make an announcement. The camera zoomed in on the governor. Her hair was a mess, her face pale. She was wearing the same sweats she had on yesterday, only now they were a lot more rumpled. But when she looked into the camera, her steady gray eyes were still bright, still focused. Patricia pushed a microphone into her face, and the governor began to speak. "I won't beat around the bush," she said. "I have declared a state of emergency. I repeat, a state of emergency. This is not martial law. Our police, and even our National Guard forces, cannot be trusted." She glanced at the reporter. "The news media cannot be trusted. You may not even be able to trust your friends or your own family." She explained about Yerks, about how, like an invisible disease, they have been infesting and slowly taking over the population. "I know this sounds fantastic," she said, "like something out of Hollywood. But by now you've seen the news footage. You know what I'm telling you is true. Our state, our nation, our entire world is under attack. But we are already fighting back. I've requested help from Washington, and the president has agreed to send U.S. troops." "U.S. troops?" I said. "That's what we've wanted from the beginning. Why am I not ecstatic?" "How can you get ecstatic about an all-out global war?" Tobias said. The governor shuffled her notes, looked into the camera again. "This is not the time for panic," she said. "It is the time for each of us to reach into our souls and pull out the courage we may not even know we possess. Our enemy is strong, but we are stronger because we are fighting for our lives and our freedom, for our very existence." "Thank you, Governor." The camera switched to Patricia. Axe clicked off the TV. We sat in silence, staring at the blank screen. Well, it seems like that secret invasion isn't so secret anymore. Post-book follow-up. Sorry, but this one just doesn't work for me. If this book was somewhere in the 20s or 30s, I'd be more receptive to it. The Marco Tobias Axe trio is always fun to watch, and I won't say that none of the jokes land, but this is just not the time or place for this. They do try their hardest to make it work, though. They don't ignore the final arc. This is still one of the more critical books in terms of the plot, and they were smart enough to keep Jake and Cassie out of things, otherwise their angst and anger would override everything this book was trying to accomplish. The problem is that so much of the effort was put into making this book funny that it seemed to suffer in most other areas. The pacing is all over the map. Time is stretched and compressed in some head-scratching ways. For example, the tank stuff that opens this book, I summarized that pretty quickly, but it's stretched over 7 chapters, nearly a third of the book. That's why this review is so short. All the plot information we need from this scene comes in the first couple of pages. Otherwise, it just drags on and only amounts to a punchline we don't even get to see. In sharp contrast is the scene of the Animorphs trying to catch ducks in the gardens, in which we go from sunrise and the park being closed to midday and the park busy and packed in what feels like a minute. Scenes are prioritized wrong. There's a chapter I didn't talk about that's devoted to Marco trying to get directions to the governor's mansion and winding up getting like the backstory of some random biker in the diner. Why is this here? What does this accomplish? Why do we have this, but we brush over the scene of Marco breaking down the Yerk invasion for the governor? This book just doesn't have a good sense of time or space. Action scenes, especially in the second half, are kind of geographically muddled and not easy to follow. Certain characters get double named for some reason, most notably the governor's husband, whom Marco initially nicknames Wingtip because of his shoes, but when we learn his name is Frank, Marco doesn't stop using the name Wingtip, resulting in a character getting referred to by 2 different names by 2 different characters in the same scene. Okay, the Frank Wingtip stuff isn't that hard to follow along with, but it shows that clarity was not a high priority for the authors here. The governor not getting a name still pisses me off. She's a good character. Why can't I know her name? It's also not much of a last book for Marco, since he reached his emotional arc in number 45, The Revelation, and is just kind of coasting on action and comedy beats this time around. You guys broke the narration order already. You don't have to make this a Marco book. This book needed a do-over. As fun as some of the dialogue is, as cool as some of the new characters are, it could have done a lot more, and it could have done it a lot more efficiently. I give number 51 The Absolute a 4 out of 10.